नजरे जमाएगा। वाह, दीदार की है तलब तो नजरे जमाएगा, चिलमन हो या नकाब सड़क की जरूर।
वाह वाह वाह।
डॉक्टर अनिल धर
अरे
will be speaking on rheumatic manifestations of diabetes mellitus, and I request Dr. S.N. Kedia and Professor Rajiv Mishra, Professor at BRD Medical College, and I can simply say he is my friend, philosopher and guide, actually my thesis guide, Professor Rajiv Mishra and Dr. S.N. Kedia.
When somebody speaks about things like that, walking, I really get scared and I feel difficult in speaking. But anyway, I'm trying to get over the difficulties and try to speak something that will be helpful to the audience at large. When we talk about diabetes or the threat of diabetes, it is because of its complications. And when we talk about complications of diabetes, obviously we are talking about the vascular complications and non-vascular complications. There is libraries and libraries of data have been written, published, spoken on the vascular complications of diabetes. Not same can be said about the non-vascular complications of diabetes. If we talk about the non-vascular complications of diabetes, we have gastrointestinal complications, genitourinary complications, dermatologic infections, which will be taken up by a different speaker later in the evening, cataracts, glaucoma, periodontal disease, hearing loss, and the rheumatological complications. Let me tell you, if there is dearth of data on any complication of diabetes, that is rheumatological complications of diabetes. Actually, when I received a call from Resh Nagar asking me to talk on rheumatologic complications of diabetes, I wasn't really sure what I'm going to talk about because I wouldn't recall too much about rheumatological complications of diabetes. Later I scanned literature and therefore I did not find too much to talk about in rheumatological complications of diabetes. And I wished he would change the topic for me. But then it was against my ego to ask him to change the topic. So I carried on with this topic. I thought whatever literature is there, I am going to present it. Well, when you talk about the rheumatological complications of diabetes, there are some complications, some rheumatologic complications which happen only in diabetes. Then there are some rheumatological conditions which happen more commonly in diabetes. They happen otherwise also, in a non-diabetic setting also, but they happen more commonly in diabetic patients. And then there are some rheumatological complications. They share risk factors with diabetes. I mean, they may not be more common in diabetes, but they share some risk factors or pathogenic mechanisms with diabetes. And they are also, talked about in rheumatological complications of diabetes, in reference to rheumatological complications of diabetes. If we talk about the condition which happens uniquely in diabetes, a rheumatological condition which happens uniquely in diabetes, and it is diabetic muscle infarction. Can I have a point? Diabetic muscle infarction was first time described by Angopol in 1965 as a tumoriform focal muscular degeneration. Hundreds of cases, actually more than 100 cases, mostly in type 1 diabetes have been more than 100 cases, mostly in type 1 diabetes, more than 15 years duration have been described. And what happens in diabetic muscle infarction is that there is acute muscle pain and swelling in thigh muscle, calf muscle. It can involve both thigh and calf muscle. It can involve other muscle groups also, like upper limb muscles also, but it's more common in the thigh muscles. The patient may come to you with a palpable mass in the thigh area, and if you do the CTK levels, it will be very high, and if you do MRI of the thigh muscles or the involved muscle in that situation, you will have iso-intense image, iso-intense swelling on, and you will have iso-intense swelling in the muscle group, involved muscle group, and in T1 visual image, in T2 visual image, you will have heterogeneously, hyper-intense image on T2 weighted sequence. If you do a gadolinium contrast, you will have contrast enhancement at the periphery of the area, at the periphery of the environment. And if you do a muscle biopsy in such cases, you will obviously have muscle fiber necrosis, edema, phagocytosis of necrotic fibers, granulation tissue, and collagen deposition. What is the mechanism of diabetic muscle injury? It's not very clear, but it is supposed to be a reperfusion injury after muscle ischemia. Hypercoagulability, endothelial dysfunction, they have also been invoked as the pathogenic mechanisms, as have been the anti-phospholipid antibodies, but none of these have been proven beyond the particular, for sure. And how do we treat them? We treat them with simply antiplatelets and anti-inflammatory drugs, and most of the patients improve, they recover from diabetic muscle infarction, do not have much residual problem, but some of these patients later are known to have macrovascular complications in the form of myocardial infarction and cerebrovascular disease in coming 2 years. So it's a red herring, it's a warning that something bigger is coming. Now, continuing with other rheumatic manifestations, and the most common rheumatic manifestation that's talked about in reference to diabetes is the limited joint mobility. It was described first time by Lundbeck in 1947 and Rosenblum in 1974. What happens in limited joint mobility is that there is thin, tight, waxy skin with flexion contractions involving the several fingers. Skin involves mainly dorsal aspect of the metaphalophalangeal, proximal and distal interphalangeal joints of the fingers. Fingers have limited movement of the joints, and other joints, wrists, elbows, knees, ankles, even the spine may have a limited movement without involvement of the joint per se. And some patients have short stature and they have delayed sexual maturation, and this complication is generally associated with other microvascular complications of diabetes in the form of retinopathy and nephropathy. Same type 1 patients who are adults, they will have incapacitating pain in the hands, it will worsen on activity, and some patients have a lot of stiffening of the skin of the fingers and palms, and the hands become very stiff, and it's called stiff hand syndrome also by some of the workers. The prevalence of limited joint mobility is very high in diabetes. It's around 30 to 58% in type 1 diabetes and 45 to 70% in type 2 diabetes. And it is around 4 to 20% non-diabetic population. You can see it's around 4 to 5 times higher in diabetic patients compared to non-diabetic patients, but it can happen in non-diabetic patients also. Diagnosis is by characteristic physical findings. If you ask the patient to hold hands in the form of a prayer, he will not be able to do it because he will not be able to oppose the palmar aspects of his both hands. So it's called prayer sign. And this is another example of prayer sign. If you ask him to hold his hands in a prayer gesture, he will not be able to do it in a very elegant way as is done in India. So he will have a limited flexibility of the fingers. He will have permanent flexion contractions leading to deformed kind of prayer gesture. And if you ask him to put his hand over the tabletop, he will again not be able to touch pull up his palmar aspect of the hand on the tabletop. So it will be again a very unelegant way of putting the hand on the table. Some workers who have worked on limited joint mobility, they have already done classification of limited joint mobility into little limitation, mild limitation, moderate, severe limitation. I'm not really boring too much with the classification of the limited joint mobility. But I have already mentioned that it is associated with diabetic microvascular complications in some studies, whereas some other studies have not shown any association with diabetic microvascular complications. But it has definite association again here with coronary artery disease and cerebrovascular disease, which is 3 to 4 times higher in patients who have limited joint mobility compared to people who do not have limited joint mobility and who are otherwise diabetic. Glycemic control influences the progression of limited joint mobility. It has been seen that from 17 to 98, there have been 4 degrees in prevalence of limited joint mobility in one study. In another study from 2002, there has been reduction in limited joint mobility from 43% to 23% almost. It has been reduced because of better glycemic control that is invoked during this time. There is a tendency towards less limited joint mobility with lower hemoglobin A1C levels. What's the treatment of limited joint mobility? Basically physiotherapy, use of NSAIDs can be encouraged in this situation to increase the mobility of the fingers. And hydroquinone and those reductive inhibitors have been used in the form of sorbolene is one salt that has been tried with good effect, but it has shown a lot of side effects in the form of familial necrosis, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, ARDS, so it has been withdrawn for this indication. So we are actually physiotherapy and NSAIDs as treatment of finger joint mobility in diabetic patients who have this condition. Next condition that I am going to talk about briefly is phenolic tenosynovitis, that is the trigger finger. Trigger finger, so many patients used to come to me with diabetics with trigger finger. I never realized that it has some association with diabetes. I thought that okay, he has diabetes otherwise, but he has trigger finger also. It's only after I went through the literature I was surprised to see that it actually has an association with diabetes. So it presents with blocking or triggering of fingers, inflection or extension, or both, most commonly involving the thumb and middle and the ring finger. Fibrosis and thickening of the tendon sheath, where it passes through the pulley or bony prominence, restricts movement of the tendon within the tendon sheath, and then swelling distal to the site of constriction causes pain and difficulty flexing and extending the rigid smoothly, as the swollen segment of the tendon passes through the narrow space, followed by more space under the catching and eventually locking of involved finger in the flexion or extension. This is a diagram of the tenosynovitis. You can see the swollen sheath of the tendon here, and you can see the swollen tendon and tendon. The swollen tendon has difficulty negotiating this ardent, rigid, and swollen sheath. So the finger gets actually caught in this tight sheath. So there is a trigger finger, or there is catch in the movement of the finger, and it's called trigger finger. The prevalence of trigger finger in diabetes is around 5 to 36%. Compared to around 2% in general population. See, 2% versus 5 and 36%. Huge increase in prevalence in diabetics compared to non-diabetic population. And diabetics also are likely to have multiple fingers involved in this. Now, correlates with duration of diabetes, it correlates with duration of diabetes, but not with glycemic control. The treatment involves modification of activities. We do not advise activities which lead to triggering of the finger. We advise NSAIDs. We advise in rheumatology, you cannot get away from NSAIDs. There are NSAIDs there and NSAIDs there. So in NSAIDs does help in movement initially, but finally you may have to give local corticosteroid injection, and sometimes you may have to ask your surgical colleague to help you out with cutting off the sheath and releasing the tendon from the constricting band of sheath. This is a diagram which shows how the corticosteroid injection is being given in the sheath to relieve the edema, and in many cases is enough to relieve the constriction and the trigger finger for a long time to come. The next rheumatic complication that we see in diabetes is the Dupuytren's contracture. The Dupuytren's contracture is otherwise also seen very commonly. I'm sure all of you have seen, but it's seen more commonly in diabetics compared to non-diabetic population. It is characterized by thickening of palmar fascia, palmar and distal nodules, skin deadening, pre-tendinous bands, flexion contractures of fingers. In diabetics, it involves middle and the ring finger more compared to little and the ring finger in non-diabetic population. In diabetics, it surprisingly causes flexion contracture less often compared to a non-diabetic population. It is more common in men in non-diabetic population, whereas in diabetics it involves both genders equally. Prevalence is already 16 to 42% in diabetics, and it is higher in old age and with longer duration of diabetes. It is also associated with retinopathy and other multi-neuropathy combinations of diabetes. This is one photograph of, obviously you can see the ardent and thickened palmar fascia here, but which is not caused any flexion contracture so far. And this is the other picture, it is already, again, ardent and thickened fascia, which is causing flexion contracture of this particular finger. That is the ring finger, and this is more clear form of the same thing, which is causing the flexion contracture of all three fingers here. See, I mean, this patient will not die of this contracture, but is definitely going to affect his quality of life. And I personally believe that it's not living long that is important. It is the quality of life that is important. That is why it is important for us to look into the rheumatic complications of diabetes also. The treatment involves local corticosteroid injection. Local, of course, we can do the surgery to relieve the contractures, and lately, people have tried glucosinase injections extracted from Clostridium histolyticum as an alternative to surgery in patients of people with contracture. It's very good effect. Next complication, dramatic complication, which I'm going to discuss and which is very common in diabetic people, is adhesive capsulitis of the shoulder periarthritis, or frozen shoulder syndrome. All of you are quite familiar with this. I'm sure some of you may actually be suffering from it. It presents as painful progressive restriction of range of shoulder motion, especially abduction and external rotation. It has three phases. Its natural history has three phases: pain, stiffness, and recovery. And the length of recovery phase depends on the duration of the stiffness phase, averaging around 30 months. The prevalence is around 10 to 29% in diabetic population. It is 5 times more compared to the non-diabetic population. Associated with the old age and longer duration of diabetes in type 1 diabetes, but not in type 2 diabetes. Associated with autonomic neuropathy, associated with autonomic neuropathy and myocardial infarction in type 1 diabetes, but not with hemoglobin A1c in either type of diabetes. This is another diagram. This shows Pickens actually, the Pickens shoulder joint capsule here. It is known to coexist with limited joint mobility. Mean hemoglobin A1c is higher in patients with both adhesive capsulitis and limited joint mobility. Joint capsule is thickened and adheres to the head of the humerus, thereby reducing the volume of glandular fluid. Histological and immunocytochemical examination of the joint capsule shows increased proliferation of fibroblasts, myofibroblasts, which means excess amount of type 1 and 3 collagen, with subsequent contraction of joint capsule results in pain and stiffness. These findings are similar to the disease of the hand. In both conditions, the expression of pathogenic growth factors, matrix metalloproteinases, and their mucus is increased, and expression of pro-inflammatory cytokines, IL-1 beta, IL-1 beta. This correlates with hypocellular dense fibrous tissue, suggesting fibrosis rather than active inflammatory process. The treatment involves analgesics, physical therapy, intraarticular corticosteroids, arthroscopic capsular release, and open surgical release. What is the pathogenesis of all the four conditions that we have discussed so far? We have discussed limited joint mobility, improvement contracture, then we have discussed adhesive capsulitis of the shoulder, trigger finger. It is basically the connective tissue deposition around joints, in tendons, in sheaths, in common fascia. Histological examination of the skin from patients with limited joint mobility reveals thickening of the dermis and epidermis, accumulation of collagen and loss of skin appendages, increased non-enzymatic glycosylation and cross-linkage of dermal collagen, accumulation of advanced glycosylation end products with cross-linking of collagen and other macromolecules has been proposed as a potential pathogenic mechanism. Then there is another small entity called calcific shoulder periarthritis. It's similar to periarthritis of the shoulder, except that there is calcification in the tendons around the shoulder joint, and this is very painful, and this is present more often in diabetes compared to non-diabetic population. Then carpal tunnel syndrome, all of you are very familiar with. It's more often seen in diabetics compared to non-diabetic population. It's an entrapment neuropathy caused by compression of the median nerve within the carpal tunnel. Carpal tunnel syndrome presents with pain and paresthesias in the areas that I've shown in this picture. If you percuss over the carpal tunnel, you will find pain and tingling sensation in this distribution that is shown in the diagram. And if you dorsiflex the wrist, you will find pain and paresthesias in the same distribution that is shown in the diagram, and that's called Fennel's test. Now, as far as diabetes is concerned, you see carpal tunnel syndrome bilaterally more often in diabetes compared to non-diabetics, and you can have involvement of both median and ulnar nerve in diabetes compared to non-diabetics. And once that happens, you will have atrophy of renal, hypotenal, injury muscles of the hand, and you will know conduction abnormalities. Diabetes mellitus is a risk factor for development of bilateral CPS. Involvement of both median nerve and double prevalence of CPS in setting of diabetic polyneuropathy. There is a possibility that median neuropathy in diabetes may be caused by factors other than mechanical compression, like intrinsic nerve pathology. Proposed pathogenic factors include hyperglycemia, reducing myoinositol transport into the nerves, increasing levels of NLURL free sugars, which may result in advanced glycation and product modification of structural nerve proteins, nerve ischemia causing NLURL hypoxia, demyelination, and deficiency of neurotrophic growth factors like nerve growth factor and IGF-1. Now, this condition, neuropathic osteoarthropathy, short course neuropathy, short course osteoarthropathy. I was, aware that it happens only in maybe neurosyphilis and leprosy in our country, but it was again a surprise that it is one of the conditions that is seen in diabetic patients. In 1968, Charcot published a detailed description of this condition in patients with aortic arthritis. Later, this name has been associated with joint condition characterized by an inflammatory process that results in dislocation of the neuropathic joint and fracture and resorption of the affected bones. This is the picture of Charcot joints of the knees. You can see that the joints are grossly deformed. There is obviously, this is another patient who has Charcot joint of the first MPP, where you see fracture, resorption of the bones, and gross deformity of the bones of the first MPP and the fifth MPP in this X-ray. And in this X-ray, you